Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Good morning, everybody. Okay, so today we will be taking it's called the Ambalatthikarahulovada Sutta. This is Sutta number 61 in the Majjhima Nikaya, beginning on page 523. Okay, and this is the meaning of the sutta is the advice to Rahula at a place called Ambalatthika. Okay, who is Rahula? Anybody know? Anybody doesn't know? So Rahula was the Buddha's own physical son. And when the Buddha was still a prince living in the palace, and he was married, according to the tradition, at the age of 16, and somehow he and his wife didn't have any children until just when he was 29 years old, so for 13 years. And then just when he was going through this process of reflection of the unsatisfactory nature of life, and pondering whether he should leave the worldly life in order to become an ascetic, his wife conceived, and then over time the pregnancy increased until, according to tradition, I don't know whether this is a real fact or not, but just when he made up his mind to renounce the worldly life, she gave birth to the child. And then it said that he gave the child the name Rahula with the meaning of fetter or bond, because the idea is that having given birth to a child, now this little child is acting as a bond on him, a kind of bond or fetter of the heart, compelling him or pressuring him to remain in the worldly life and not to renounce. I don't really know how the word Rahula gets the meaning of fetter, since it seems to be based on the name Rahu, which is supposed to be a kind of demon that swallows up the moon. Maybe it was the ancient Indian way of representing the lunar eclipse. So anyway, the tradition explains the name Rahula to mean fetter. And yet the Buddha made the decision, even though his wife had just given birth to this baby, he made the decision to leave the household life. And according to tradition, on the very night that he decided to renounce, when his wife and the newborn baby were lying in the bed, in the middle of the night, he got up and he went to the door of their chamber, bed chamber, and he opened the door, and then he looked back one final time at his wife and child sleeping on the bed. Perhaps his heart was torn with indecision. Should I go back? Should I leave? Should I go back? Should I leave? But then he decided to leave, and the rest is history. But then, after his quest for enlightenment took 6 years, and then shortly after his enlightenment, when he began to teach, as his reputation spread, the Sakyans heard that their own offspring, the prince Siddhartha, has now become the famous teacher known as the Buddha. And so they invited him to come back to the capital of the Sakyan Republic, Ambalatthikarahulovada. And so the Buddha came back and visited the city. And as he was walking down the street, together with the community of monks, his former wife and the child were looking out the window of the palace. And then his wife pointed him out to Rahula and said, "Rahula, do you know who that is?" And Rahula said, "No, I don't." Then the wife said, "That is your father." And then she said to Rahula, "Go to him and ask him for your inheritance." Maybe she had in mind to receive, the wealth of the kingdom. Well, it wasn't a kingdom, it was a republic, but the wealth of their aristocratic family. And so Rahula went up to the Buddha and said, "Father, please give me my inheritance." And the Buddha paused and thought, should I give him a worldly inheritance, just wealth that will just eventually decay and vanish? Or should I give him the deathless inheritance, the path to nirvana? And so then the Buddha turned to Sariputta and said, "Ordain him." And so the Buddha's disciple Sariputta ordained Rahula, and in this way Rahula became, at the age of 7, became a novice monk. Okay, and so when this sutta opens, apparently Rahula is still a little boy, still just a young novice. And so here the Buddha wants to give Rahula a little lesson in a basic ethical point. Perhaps it was the case that Rahula, as a little boy, thought that it would be, like there's a habit with little boys, thought it would be fun to speak falsehoods, to tell lies, to mislead people, in order to be able to laugh at them when they believed his lies. Okay, so Rahula, the Buddha goes to Rahula while he's living at this grove, probably very close to the bamboo grove. And then Rahula prepares a seat for him, and so on, and then pays homage to him and sits down. And now the Buddha, very, very skillfully, is going to use a practical device, a practical method to teach Rahula the lesson that he wants to impart to him. And the point of his lesson is going to be the importance of maintaining truthful speech. Okay, so Rahula sets up some water for the Buddha to wash his feet. And so the Buddha washes his feet, and then he leaves a little bit of water in the vessel. And he asks Rahula, "Do you see this little bit of water left in the vessel?" And Rahula says, "Yes." Then the Buddha says, even so little, Rahula, is the it's a little difficult to understand here, is the recluseship of those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. What's meant by recluseship here, you would say, is, maybe you could put it more freely, the value of the spiritual life for one who is not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. But since Rahula is now a little ascetic, a little renunciant, so the Buddha phrases his point in terms of recluseship. Okay, so there's a little water left in the vessel, and in the same way, one who is not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie has just a little bit of spirituality left in him. Okay, then the Buddha throws away the little bit of water that was left, and says, do you see how that little bit of water was thrown away? And Rahula says, yes. So then the Buddha says, in the same way, in just that way, the recluseship or spirituality has been thrown away of those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. Okay, then the third example, the Buddha turns the water vessel upside down and says, do you see how this vessel has been turned upside down? And then Rahula says, yes. And the Buddha says, in the same way, those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie have turned their recluseship or their spiritual life upside down. Okay, then the fourth step, the Buddha turns the vessel upright again and then points out to Rahula that the water vessel is now empty. And then the Buddha makes the point that in the same way, the spirituality or recluseship of those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie becomes hollow and empty. Okay, so these are four similes, all based on the example of the water vessel that the Buddha uses to convey to Rahula the importance of speaking the truth. Okay, now the Buddha gives another simile. This one is a little bit problematic. I'm in paragraph 7 now. The Buddha says, suppose there were a royal tusker elephant with tusks, long tusks. It's a very powerful elephant that's used in battle. And so in battle it would perform its task with its forefeet, with its hind feet, with its forequarters, hindquarters, with his head and his ears, with his tusks and his tail. Yet he would keep back his trunk. Okay, in this case, his rider would think that the elephant, the royal tusker elephant, even though he's willing to exert himself in battle, yet he's still holding back. He's not yet really fully surrendered himself to his task. But when that elephant performs his task with every part of his body, even with his trunk, then the rider would think that now this tusker elephant is even ready to give up his life for the sake of battle, for winning the battle. Now there is nothing that this royal tusker elephant would not do. And so then the Buddha now draws out the point of the simile. So too, Rahula, when one is not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie, there is no evil, I say, that one would not do. Therefore, you should train thus. I will not utter a falsehood, even as a joke. Okay, the reason why I say that this last simile is a little bit problematic. Maybe does anybody else have any idea of why I say that it's problematic? When the elephant is ready to sacrifice everything for the sake of the battle, what would the king think of that elephant or the rider?
I would think of a liar as one who just uses part of himself. That the elephant is using all of himself. It doesn't suggest someone telling a lie to me.
Yeah, that's so, but maybe it's not exactly what I was thinking.
You were thinking it endangered the one riding the elephant? Is that just...
No. It's really not, it's pretty simple.
The elephant is changing positively.
Yeah, I think that's the point, yeah. If the elephant is ready to sacrifice himself, even to use his trunk in the battle, then one would evaluate that as a really worthy, admirable elephant. Whereas somebody is willing to speak a deliberate falsehood, or somebody is not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie, then we would rate that person negatively. So that's why I say it seems a little bit strange. Yeah, please.
When you read it, I took the other meaning. I thought withholding the trunk meant withholding the truth. You're still holding on to some form of ego, selfishness, and the surrender of offering everything is the surrender of always offering the truth, no matter what the consequences. That's how I took it.
I saw it the other way that I explained, and the way that this gentleman in the back saw it.
I saw it as a sense of restraint, and then by withholding the trunk, you maintain some sort of self-awareness, and then let it go, you sort of lose all sense of control.
Yeah, maybe that is the way in which the simile works. But there still seems to be a little bit of a tension here, since, at least the way I see it, that from the standpoint of a military, or king, or the general in charge of the army, the elephant that's willing to even to use its trunk, doesn't spare any part of its body, would be considered admirable, the best elephant to use in battle. Whereas the person who is willing to tell a deliberate lie, not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie, is one that we would rate negatively. Yeah, I want to go over some of the points that come out from Buddhist texts and also from my own reflection on the importance of telling the truth. First, I think it's, even though this text is speaking solely about avoiding speaking falsehood, about not telling a deliberate lie, but other texts analyze speaking falsehood in terms of the motivation. Maybe the classical text that's repeated in many suttas on speaking falsehood, we'd find an example of it in Sutta number 41. This is on page 380. In paragraph 9, which begins at the end of at the bottom of the page. Here the Buddha is explaining 4 kinds of verbal conduct that are not in accordance with the Dhamma, unrighteous conduct. And the first of these is speaking falsehood. So the example given is that when one is summoned to a court or to a meeting, to his relatives' presence, or to his guild, or to the royal family's presence, and questioned as a witness thus, "Tell what you know." Not knowing, he says, "I know," or knowing, he says, "I do not know." Not seeing, he says, "I see," or seeing, he says, "I do not see." In full awareness, he speaks falsehood for his own ends, or for another's ends, or for some trifling worldly end. And so it seems in the suttas which single out false speech, or the suttas which are defining false speech as a type of unrighteous conduct, what is singled out for special mention is the falsehood which takes place when one bears false witness. That is, when one is committing, in effect, what is perjury. And the reason why one is speaking falsehood in this, according to this passage, one is doing so for one's own ends or for another's ends. Those are the two main reasons. One is doing so to secure some benefit for oneself or some benefit for somebody else, maybe somebody who is close to you, like a relative or friend. And then what's added is for some trifling, worldly end. I don't know what specifically could be intended by that. But anyway, this is, in the suttas, the classical description of false speech. Other texts explain the different motivations that lie behind false speech. And these are usually given in terms of the three unwholesome roots. So there can be false speech, which is motivated by greed. This is when one speaks falsehood to gain some benefit for oneself or for those who are close to oneself, to gain wealth, position, respect, admiration, praise, so on. Okay, then there's false speech which originates from hatred or ill will. This is where one tells a malicious lie. That is when one lies in order to hurt others, to damage others, maybe to ruin the good standing, good reputation of others, to break up friendships, to embarrass or humiliate others. And then the third motivation for lying is delusion. And this I've just tried to think of some examples of delusion. One might be the irrational lie. Somebody who doesn't really have a very clear reason for lying, but just becomes a habitual or compulsive liar. You know, there are some people who just feel a constant compulsion to lie, even though there's no clear driving motivation for the lie. It just becomes a habitual way of life with them. And another type of lie arising from delusion, I don't know, other examples don't come to mind. Anybody else have any ideas? Or could be, please.
Well, I don't have an idea about that, but I wonder how it meshes with compassion. Some lies. Somebody says, oh, my granddaughter said recently, I'm the smartest. And I thought, well, you're not really the smartest.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or
Yeah.
I'm ugly. You don't want to say, yeah, you're ugly. You know, so I wonder how compassion blends in with some kinds of...
Yeah, this is actually something that I plan to come into.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay, but it's something that I was going to get to. But just to take some examples of what might be considered lies springing from delusion. Yeah.
People lie because they think it will do more good. Don't worry, there's no radiation from Fukushima. The water's safe. That's coming from a delusional point of view. Governments lie. People have certain, I think, delusional motivations to prevent panic, things like that.
Yeah, though in this case, I would say that the government knows the truth. It could be lying in order to delude people.
For their own good.
It could be for the people's own good.
As it were, yeah. I'm putting quotes about that.
Then we come to this point that Dina just raised about lying, which might be motivated by compassion. which is a point that I want to come to. I'm trying to think of more examples of lies that might be motivated by delusion.
People do persuade themselves that a lie is the truth. I
Yeah.
once dated the son of a general who said that his father persuaded himself that it was absolutely true that we had to fight in Vietnam. That we crossed the line from a deliberate lie to actually believing the lie is the truth.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Yeah. In fact, I had that under a different heading that I wanted to cover in speaking about falsehood and obligation to speak the truth. Yeah, I wanted to sort of explore some of the reasons that underlie the stricture against lying. Okay, I just came up with a few reasons. Maybe in discussion we could add some more. One is that lying is disruptive of social cohesion. Like in order for any kind of social unit to hold together harmoniously and to avoid disruption, what's necessary is for people to have trust in one another. And so, as long as we can have some confidence that in our communications we are hearing the truth from others, and as long as others could have some confidence that they are hearing the truth from us, then we have reasons for cooperating, collaborating, and holding together into a harmonious and successfully functioning society. But when people start to speak falsehood, well, first at the individual level, if one sees that a person is repeatedly speaking falsehood, then how do you relate to that person? What's the natural reaction when that person tells you something important?
You don't trust them.
You don't trust them, yeah. And now if this spreads throughout the society, then the kind of trust that serves as the glue or cement that holds society together, that gets shattered, and we fall into a state of kind of survival of the fittest, where we're willing to use any kind of deception, falsehood, lies, in order to advance ourselves or those that that are dear to us, and to harm and injure others. And for this reason, I would say that responsibility for speaking the truth falls most heavily upon those in positions of authority. And so when those in positions of power and authority are known to speak falsehood, then the sense of trust breaks down to the whole social order, and the feeling spreads that if they're entitled to lie, I too can tell a lie. Since, if they're so important in such powerful positions, and they're telling lies, then a small fry like myself, if I tell lies, it's not really so significant. And so I think this is almost a situation that we're coming to in this country now, when we find out that, especially the way major corporations spread falsehoods. I remember years ago when reports were coming out about the connection between cigarette smoking and lung cancer and heart disease. The tobacco companies tried to hide all of the evidence and to spread falsehood that there's no connection, but there's just chance connection between smoking and lung cancer. And now it's the connection between carbon emissions and global warming. The powerful petroleum corporations, coal corporations, they try to cover up all of the evidence. They set up their own, quote, research councils, their own websites to spread the misleading or disinformation, trying to throw question marks around the connection between carbon emissions and global warming. Okay, so that's in corporations and in politics also. We find that, it's very difficult to find politicians who are people of real intelligence.